Shattered Horizon. Chapter 1: The Fall. My name is Nathaniel Blackwood, though most call me Nate. I'm 43, a former F-16 fighter pilot who now flies civilian charters for a living. I once thought I'd already weathered the worst life could throw at me, in Afghanistan, where I buried friends and pieces of my soul in scorched desert sand. Then came the death of my youngest son Noah, just 11 years old, in a car crash I'll never forgive myself for since I was behind the wheel. My wife Olivia, a former military psychologist, helped me navigate the PTSD after war, but after losing our son, a chasm opened between us, deeper than the mountain valleys I now find myself flying over. What happened next proved one simple truth. When you think you've hit rock bottom, life gleefully reveals there's always further to fall. The mountain descent. At 20,000 feet, the air is thin and brittle as old glass. Inside the cockpit of the experimental Skylark SR-9, you don't feel the -60 degrees that would freeze your breath solid the moment it left your lips. Right now, that was the least of my concerns. The instrument panel, usually a soothing constellation of steady lights, had transformed into a pulsing crimson nightmare. Hydraulic pressure plummeting. No, not plummeting, crashing with the terminal velocity of a shot-down helicopter. I'd seen enough of those in Afghanistan to recognize the signature of inevitable disaster. Sierra Alpha 19 calling control. Critical hydraulic pressure failure. Requesting emergency corridor for immediate landing. Silence. Only white noise hissing in my headset. The radio was dead too, not a coincidence. I wrestled with the yoke trying to level the aircraft, but the ailerons barely acknowledged my commands. The plane began to bank left, spiraling into what pilots ominously refer to as the death spiral. Sweat stung my eyes, but I couldn't spare even a second to wipe it away. My hands moved automatically, working through procedures I'd practiced thousands of times, but simulators always offered the comfort of a reset button. Here, 30,000 feet above the Appalachian wilderness, there would be no second chances. Through breaks in the cloud cover, I glimpsed an endless carpet of dense forest. No clearings, no flat terrain, nothing that resembled a viable landing zone. But choice was a luxury I'd lost along with my hydraulics. The altimeter counted down the remaining thousands of feet with the cold precision of an executioner's pocket watch. 15,000, 12,000, would I make it? A memory flashed with brutal clarity, my last fight with Olivia before this flight. Her words, delivered with glacier-cold contempt. "Isn't our son's death enough for your conscience? Do you want Ethan and Abby to become complete orphans?" Those words had cut deep then. Now they echoed with prophetic cruelty. 8,000, 5,000. There, a barely perceptible break in the forest canopy. A narrow river, twisting like a silver thread through the wilderness. Not ideal, but better than smashing into an unforgiving wall of pines and oaks. I pointed the aircraft's nose toward this slender hope, ignoring the groans and shrieks of engineering refusing to obey my commands. 2,000, 1,000. The moment I clipped the first treetops, a crystal clarity washed over me. The hydraulics hadn't failed, they'd been sabotaged. Too precise, too professional, exactly like the brakes in the car where Noah died. This wasn't coincidence. Someone wanted me dead. Metal transformed into a symphony of screeching and tearing as the fuselage began to disintegrate against the treetops. Something jagged pierced my side. The instrument panel rushed toward my face with terrifying speed. The last sensation I registered was the warm pulse of blood on my face and thoughts of my children, Ethan and Abby. Who would tell them the truth if I died here? Darkness descended suddenly, like a theater going black between acts. Bitter homecoming. 3 days before the crash. The scent of home hit me the moment I opened the front door. Familiar, once comforting, yet somehow foreign now, like a photograph of a place where happiness once resided. I carefully set my duffel bag on the floor of the entryway. From the kitchen came the ordinary sounds of dishes being arranged, Olivia preparing dinner. "I'm home," I said, my own voice sounding like an intrusion, a discordant note in a funeral dirge. 2 years ago, Olivia would have met me at the door, smiling perhaps with a cold drink after a long day. She would have kissed me, asked about my day. Now between us stretched a cold, viscous space filled with unspoken accusations and untried tears. I walked to the kitchen. Olivia stood with her back to me, mechanically slicing vegetables. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, her shoulders rigid with tension. Once I could read her every movement, could decipher her mood from the tilt of her head. Now a stranger stood before me. "Hi, Olivia." The knife paused momentarily. She didn't turn. "Dinner will be ready in half an hour." I wanted to say so much. About meeting with Victor Harmon, our old friend and business partner. About the charter flight he'd offered me, dangerous but highly paid. About how that money could help with college for Ethan and Abby. About how I missed her, missed us. But the words lodged in my throat. In this house, we'd forgotten how to speak to each other the moment they lowered Noah's small coffin into the ground. "I'll go say hello to the kids," I said instead of the 1,000 unspoken words. Walking up the stairs, I heard music flowing from Abby's room, heavy, with bass lines that drowned the melody. The door was closed, and I knew knocking would be futile. Over the past months, my 17-year-old daughter had transformed into a ghost, existing in a parallel reality that intersected with mine only during inevitable collisions at the dinner table. I knocked softly on Ethan's door. Unlike his sister, my 19-year-old son still spoke to me. "Come in, Dad." Ethan sat at his desk, surrounded by textbooks and printouts. His hair, as dark as Olivia's but with lighter streaks I'd passed down genetically, was cut short. He was preparing for application to the Air Force Academy, following in my footsteps. Sometimes I wondered if this was his way of holding onto something from our previous life. "How's it going?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Not bad. Professor Jenkins said my chances for a scholarship have improved." "That's excellent news, son." Ethan smiled, restrained, adult-like. Sometimes I saw myself at his age reflected in him, but I was never so serious. War and his brother's death had forced him to grow up too quickly. "How was the meeting with Mr. Harmon?" he asked, setting aside his pencil. "Did he mention a new contract?" I nodded. Ethan was the only one in the family who showed interest in my work. "He offered a charter flight, private cargo transport across the Blue Ridge Mountains. The pay is substantial." "But—" Ethan always could read between the lines. I sighed. "The route is challenging, passes over areas with no radio contact, and the client requested anonymity, which is unusual." "Did you accept?" I met his gaze, direct, attentive. In his eyes lay a question he didn't dare ask. "Is it worth it?" "I don't know, son. The money would help. For you, for Abby." Dinner progressed in familiar silence, interrupted only by the clink of forks against plates. Abby appeared exactly at the start, not looking at me, and merely pushed food around her plate without uttering a word. Her slender face had grown gaunt, shadows lurking beneath her eyes. She was once Daddy's little girl. Now, each time she looked at me, she saw only the man responsible for her younger brother's death. I decided to mention Victor's offer only when Ethan began, helping Olivia clear the table. "Victor offered me a contract. A charter flight," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Olivia froze, holding a stack of plates, her back tensed like a drawn bow. "The pay is good, would help with the kids' college." She turned slowly. In her eyes, once so warm and understanding, now burned only a cold fury. "One death on your conscience isn't enough. You want Ethan and Abby to become complete orphans." The word struck like a physical blow. Ethan's head snapped up. "Mom." "No, let him answer." Olivia didn't take her eyes off me. You're putting yourself at risk to run away again, like in the military, always running. Olivia, I'm doing this for our family. I tried to speak calmly, though everything inside me boiled. For the family. You don't care about this family. You've already destroyed it. She threw the plates on the table with such force that one cracked. A shard flew off and left a thin red line on her palm. Olivia didn't even notice. In her eyes was something beyond anger, something foreign, unfamiliar, as if I were looking at someone I'd never known. I don't need your money, Nate. I needed you to be a good father to our children, at least to those you didn't kill with your recklessness. A stifled sob came from Abby's direction. She stood abruptly and ran from the room. Ethan stood frozen in indecision between us, torn between loyalty to his mother and father. Go after your sister, I said quietly. When he left, Olivia and I remained alone, separated by a table and an invisible chasm the size of a child's grave. I'm taking the contract, I said finally. Not for the money, because I need something to do, otherwise I'll just break. You're already broken, Nate, she answered without emotion, and you broke all of us along with you. I left the kitchen, feeling physical pain where my heart once resided. In the bedroom that we now took turns occupying, I slept there when she worked night shifts. I took out my phone and called Victor. I'm in, I said when he answered. When's the flight? 3 days, Victor's voice sounded pleased. You won't regret it, Nate. This is a new beginning for you. As I would later discover, he had no idea how right he was. Suspicious details. The next morning I left the house earlier than usual. Olivia was still asleep, or pretending to be, to avoid encountering me. I left a note on the kitchen table, at the hangar, back for dinner. The brevity of military obituaries. The cold morning air somewhat cleared my head. After a night spent sleepless, replaying every word of yesterday's argument, I needed something precise, concrete, aircraft, mechanics, physical laws that don't change with human emotions. At the flight company office, a small single-story building next to the hangars, I requested documents for the upcoming flight. Susie, our dispatcher, handed me the folder with her usual smile. Are you sure you want to take this one, Nate? The route is difficult. I need the money, Suze, for the kids. She nodded understandingly. Everyone here knew about my tragedy. Small towns don't keep secrets. I was reviewing the papers when strange details caught my attention. The route had been changed at the last minute. Now it passed through airspace over remote areas of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where radio communication was practically non-existent. The cargo was listed as technical equipment, without specifications. The client, an anonymous company registered offshore. It was all atypical, not illegal. I'd transported similar cargo before, especially for private research companies. But something scratched at my consciousness, like a splinter under the skin. When my phone rang, I jumped. Olivia's number. She had barely called me in recent months. Yes. Silence, then quick breathing. Olivia. I heard her voice, but not speaking to me. She was talking to someone in the room. Don't understand why we need to risk so much. What if the plan doesn't work? A male voice replied something, but I couldn't make out the words. Yes, all right, Olivia's voice again, tense, uncertain. No, Leo, I'm sure I want this. Just be careful. Leo Jenkins, our chief mechanic. The call ended abruptly. Olivia clearly didn't realize her phone had connected to mine. An accidental pocket dial, it happens, but the words I'd heard. I set aside the documents and headed straight to the hangar. Leo was tinkering with the engine of a small twin-seat Cessna. Seeing me, he straightened too quickly. On his face flashed an expression I knew well. It appears on people who suddenly encounter someone they don't want to see. Nate, wasn't expecting you today. His hands, usually confident and precise, now nervously wiped oil with a rag. Leo was an excellent mechanic, We'd worked together for 3 years. He'd come to our town after several years with a major airline. Tired of corporate bustle, he'd explained. We were never close friends, but I trusted his work. Until now. Is the charter plane ready? I asked in a neutral tone. Of course, though I don't understand why you'd take this shitty assignment, Nate. The route's awful, cargo unknown. That's exactly why I need to know the aircraft is in perfect condition. He nodded too hastily. Everything's great. As always, I personally checked every system. I believed him, once believed him. But his nervousness, Olivia's strange conversation, the route changes. Too many coincidences for a former Special Forces operator. Show me the aircraft, Leo. His Adam's apple bobbed. It's in the far hangar, for final inspection. Let's go together. We walked across the airfield in silence. I could feel Leo radiating almost palpable tension. His gaze darted around as if seeking escape routes. Several times he started to speak but fell silent without uttering a word. Problems, Leo? I finally asked. He stumbled, though the path was perfectly level. No, why would you think that? Just busy and personal issues, nothing serious. You were talking to my wife today. It was a shot in the dark, but Leo's reaction confirmed my suspicions. His face paled, eyes widening in panic. What? No, we just. Just what, Leo? He swallowed, avoiding my gaze. Just doing my job as always. We reached the hangar. The Skylark SR-9 stood there, gleaming white, elegant, with thin blue stripes along the sides. An experimental model designed for long-distance flights with minimal fuel consumption. I ran my hand along the smooth fuselage. I'll check it myself, Leo, from start to finish, every system. Suit yourself, he mumbled. I actually need to, there's another plane. He practically ran from the hangar, leaving me alone with the aircraft and a growing suspicion that I'd stepped into something far more dangerous than just a risky charter flight. That evening, I tried talking to Olivia about Leo's strange behavior. She sat in the living room, reviewing some documents. Same tight bun of hair, same tense line of shoulders. Do you know Leo Jenkins? I began, sitting in the chair opposite her. She didn't even look up. The mechanic saw him a couple times at company events. He called you today. Now she looked at me. In her eyes was not fear, not guilt, but cold irritation. So you're monitoring my calls now. Delightful, Nate. No, I overheard accidentally. You dialed me without realizing. You're hallucinating, she shook her head. PTSD flaring up again, seeing spies and conspiracies. Her words hit the mark precisely. Military psychologists know where to strike. Olivia, what's happening? Leo's acting strange. The flight documents changed at the last minute. Listen to yourself, she cut me off harshly. You see enemies where there are none and don't notice your own mistakes. That's why we're here, Nate. That's why Noah is dead. I stood up, feeling everything inside constricting. Olivia had always been my anchor, the person who helped me return from the war that continued in my head. Now, she was using that same knowledge to destroy me. What happened to you, Olivia? I asked quietly. This isn't you. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, fear, regret, but instantly disappeared, replaced by the familiar coldness. I just finally saw you for who you are, Nate, who you've always been. She returned to her documents, indicating the conversation was over. I went to the bedroom, where I again spent a sleepless night, turning over the strange events of recent days and wondering if I was right in my paranoia. Flight preparation. Dawn found me already at the hangar. I'd spent the last 2 days methodically checking every aircraft system. I found nothing suspicious, but the worm of doubt continued gnawing from within. Mr. Blackwood, a young technician whose name I couldn't recall, handed me a folder. Final documents for your flight. Mr. Harmon asked me to deliver them personally. I reviewed the papers. The same oddities, anonymous cargo, altered route. But now I noticed another detail. The emergency landing airfield had been changed from Asheville to a small private airport deep in the mountains, significantly farther from the main route. Another coincidence, they were becoming too numerous. I climbed into the cockpit to check the navigation system one more time when my phone rang. Seeing Abby's name on the screen made my heart leap. She'd barely called me since Noah's funeral. "Abby, sweetheart." "Dad," her voice sounded strange, as if she wasn't sure she should be calling. "Are you okay?" "Of course, honey, getting ready for the flight." A pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "Be careful, Dad." "Always, sweetheart." Another pause, then. "I had a weird dream last night. You were falling in a plane, and no one could find you." A chill ran down my spine. For a second I felt an irrational fear, something akin to superstition. In Afghanistan, we believed in such omens. Too often they came true. "It was just a dream, Abby." "Yeah, just take care of yourself, okay?" "I promise." She hung up before I could tell her how much I loved her. The call left a strange feeling behind. It was the first sign of care from her in months, and it sounded like a warning. I returned to my checks but couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to Olivia's conversation with Leo, to the strange route, to Abby's premonition. Something was forming a pattern, but the details eluded me. When the phone rang again, I expected anything but Ethan's name on the screen. 2 calls from my children in one day, a record for recent months. "Ethan." "Dad, I found something important about Noah's accident." His voice was tense, with that pulsating urgency I remembered from Afghanistan. The way people talk about a planted bomb, an ambush, something deadly dangerous. "What do you mean?" "The forensic report. There are inconsistencies, the breaks were." The connection suddenly cut off. I tried calling back, but Ethan's phone was unavailable. I dialed the home number, no answer. Anxiety grew, transforming into an almost physical sensation of danger. A text message arrived as I was preparing to leave the hangar and rush home. "Dad, I'm fine, just phone died. Be extremely careful. Don't trust V." Victor. But why should Ethan distrust Victor? They'd always gotten along well. After Noah's death, Victor had been one of the few who supported our family, especially Olivia. He helped with the funeral, with legal matters, even with psychological support for the children. I tried calling again without success. Departure time was approaching, and the feeling that something was catastrophically wrong only intensified. "Mr. Blackwood, everything's ready for takeoff." The young technician peeked into the cockpit. "Weather's perfect." I should have postponed the flight. Gone home, talked to Ethan, sorted out this situation. But if I backed out of the contract now, the money would be gone. Money that could secure college for Ethan and Abby, give them a chance at the future Noah deserved. "Thanks, I'll be ready in 5 minutes." Sabotage discovery. "Sierra Alpha 19, you've reached cruising altitude. Happy flying." The controller's voice was the last thing I heard before the radio descended into the emptiness of white noise. According to plan, I was entering a zone where communication would be restored only after an hour of flight. At 30,000 feet, the world seems remarkably simple. White clouds below, endless azure above. The horizon curves just enough to remind you of Earth's spherical nature. The cabin is quiet, only the measured hum of engines breaking the silence. That's why I noticed the slight change in the hydraulic system sound almost immediately. Not a failure, not a malfunction, just a small alteration in tone that an ordinary passenger would never detect. But for a test pilot, it was like hearing a false note in a symphony. I checked the instrument readings. Pressure in the main hydraulic system was within normal range, but I frowned. It was dropping. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but steadily. Not rapidly enough to trigger emergency alarms, but at this rate, pressure would fall to critical levels within an hour or two. I switched to the backup system and ran diagnostics. The readings stubbornly indicated a leak somewhere in the main line. But where? And more importantly, why? Ethan's message about the brakes in Noah's car flashed in my memory. Could it be? I opened the maintenance log, checking the last service entry. Everything was in order, Leo's signature in place. But if he'd done something to the system after the official inspection? I turned on the radio, trying to contact any available control point. Silence. Either I was still too far away, or the radio had been intentionally disabled. The pressure continued to drop, faster now than I'd anticipated, as if something had completely depressurized. I physically felt the controls becoming less responsive. The ailerons reacted with a delay, the elevator required more effort. I switched to the emergency manual system, but it too wasn't working as it should. Someone had thought this through very carefully. The damage was calculated to ensure failure occurred precisely here, over impassable wilderness, without the ability to contact controllers. A realization flashed in my mind. The same precise calculation as in the car crash where Noah died. Brakes, hydraulics, same principles, different systems. And the same result, a fatal accident designed to look like a mishap or pilot error. The instrument panel began flashing red warning lights as pressure dropped to critical levels. The aircraft started to bank left, slowly entering a spiral. This wasn't coincidence, wasn't accident. Someone wanted me dead, and apparently the same someone was behind Noah's death. "Survive, Blackwood," I whispered aloud. "Prove your innocence." But even my military experience and pilot skills couldn't fix what was already broken. I could only delay the inevitable. The plane began to fall, you know the rest. I fought with the controls, trying to keep the aircraft in a relatively level position. Without hydraulics, steering was heavy, systems response delayed. Like lifting weights underwater, fighting against the current. In Afghanistan, they taught us, if you're in a no-win situation, choose how to die. I didn't want to die. I had children who, despite all our problems, needed me. I had a truth that needed to be revealed. I pointed the aircraft's nose toward the river, fighting against the increasing rate of descent. The machine creaked and groaned, resisting my efforts like a living thing refusing to obey. I closed my eyes before impact, not from fear. My mind filled with faces. Ethan serious with eyes full of quiet wisdom. Abby, once sunny and bright, now locked in her grief. Noah, whom I couldn't protect. Olivia, the Olivia I loved who had been my anchor before she transformed into a stranger with cold eyes. I couldn't fail them, not again. The first impact was deafening. Treetops lashed the fuselage like giant green waves. Metal screeched, tearing apart. The cockpit glass cracked but, amazingly, didn't shatter completely. The second impact was harder. The plane fully entered the forest canopy. I felt something sharp pierce my side, a fragment of the instrument panel or fuselage. The pain was so intense that, for a moment, the world whitened before my eyes. I barely remember the third impact. The plane spun and the instrument panel rushed toward me. I felt my ribs breaking from the collision, air expelled from my lungs. The taste of blood filled my mouth. The last thing I remembered before the world plunged into darkness was a strange sensation. I wasn't dying. Somehow, against all odds, I'd survived the crash. Through foggy consciousness, I saw someone approaching the shattered cockpit. A tall, bearded man with a medical bag. His eyes, surprised but determined. "Hold on, you're severely injured," I heard through the blood poolsing in my ears. Darkness descended suddenly, like a theater going black between acts. My final thought pulsed in my fading consciousness. I must survive, for the children. They wouldn't become orphans. I wouldn't let that happen. Even if the whole world was against me, I intended to survive, and find whoever was behind this. Find whoever took my son from me. Chapter 2, Truth. Pain brought me back to life. Sharp, pulsating, it radiated from my broken ribs throughout my body in waves of agony. The darkness dissipated slowly like fog over a marsh at dawn. Through the haze, I saw an unfamiliar ceiling, rough wooden beams intertwined with something metallic, warped. Fragments of my aircraft. The memory of the crash returned instantly. The fall, the trees, the pain, the strange figure leaning over me. I hadn't died, but I wasn't sure I'd survived either. Between these states, it turns out, exists an agonizingly long intermediate space. Rescue and isolation. Consciousness returned in spurts, like a poorly tuned radio. I didn't know how long I'd been unconscious, but the light filtering through cracks in the walls indicated daytime. An attempt to sit up resulted in a new wave of pain that darkened my vision. "Wouldn't recommend that," said a voice somewhere to my right. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, and a concussion, not injuries you should rush to aggravate. I turned my head slowly, trying not to trigger another wave of pain. On a stool beside the narrow cot sat a tall, bearded man in his 60s. Tanned face with deep wrinkles, long gray hair tied back in a ponytail. His hands, neat with long fingers, held a bandage he just removed from my chest. "Who are you?" My voice was as rough as sandpaper on wood. "I think it would be more appropriate to ask that of you." He lowered the bandage into a bowl containing some herbal liquid. "Not every day people fall from the sky into my part of the wilderness. But I can introduce myself. Gabriel Reeves, hermit by circumstance, doctor by training, and now, evidently, your savior." "Nathaniel Blackwood, pilot," each word came with difficulty. "My plane. Most of it is scattered across the forest in a half-mile radius," Gabriel interrupted. "What could be useful I brought here. Nature will reclaim the rest." He applied a fresh bandage to my chest. His movements were precise, measured, the actions of a professional who had performed the same procedure thousands of times. "How long have I been here?" 2 weeks, he answered, not looking up from his work. "You've been fighting for your life most of that time. Fever, infection, bleeding. I lost you twice and brought you back twice. If you're religious, you can thank your God for tenacity. If not, thank evolution for a sturdy constitution." 2 weeks, my family must think I'm dead. Ethan, Abby, even Olivia. Despite all our problems, news of my death would cause them pain. "I need to contact my family." I tried to sit up again, ignoring the pain. "Is there a phone radio?" Gabriel's face changed. A slight furrow between his brows, barely noticeable tension at the corners of his mouth. "I'm afraid that's impossible." "What do you mean, impossible? They think I'm dead." "Perhaps it's better they continue thinking so." These words felt like a slap. I grabbed his wrist, despite the pain that shot through my ribs. "What the hell does that mean?" Gabriel didn't try to free himself. He simply looked at me with a strange expression, a mixture of compassion and wariness. "Your aircraft was sabotaged, Mr. Blackwood. I've seen enough accidents to distinguish mechanical failure from deliberate damage. Someone very much wanted you not to return from this flight." A chill ran down my spine. I released his hand. "So I was right." "About what?" "Before the crash, I noticed signs of sabotage. The hydraulics were damaged too, professionally." Gabriel nodded, as if I'd confirmed his own conclusions. "As soon as you contact the outside world, whoever arranged the accident will learn you survived and finish the job." "How do you know all this? How do you have so much information about what happened?" For the first time in our conversation, Gabriel averted his eyes. He stood, walked to a roughly constructed cabinet, and took out some pills. "Take these for the pain." I began, but he interrupted. "I heard you, and I'll answer, but not now. Right now you need rest. Once you're strong enough to hear the full story, I'll tell you everything I know." I wanted to insist, but my body betrayed me. A wave of weakness washed over me, and I realized I was exhausted even from this brief conversation. My eyes closed of their own accord. "As soon as you call, they'll come for you," and for me was the last thing I heard before I fell back into darkness. "They'll find out who I am. I can't allow that." The following days passed in a semi-conscious state. I would wake, consume the food Gabriel brought, mostly soups and broths made from local plants, and then sink back into sleep. Gradually, periods of wakefulness grew longer. I began to notice details of my shelter, a cabin partially constructed of wood, partially from the wreckage of my aircraft. Sunlight penetrated through cracks in the walls, drawing intricate patterns on the earthen floor. Gabriel avoided discussions about his past and how he ended up in the wilderness. Obviously, his medical education was genuine. He knew what he was doing when treating my wounds and administering medications. He spoke about the outside world with the erudition of someone who was once part of civilization. But whenever I tried to learn details, he would change the subject or simply walk away. On the 5th day of my conscious stay in the cabin, I made my first attempt to stand. My legs buckled like cotton, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping with the pain in my ribs. "I told you," Gabriel helped me back to the bed. "You won't be going anywhere for at least a week." But the next day I tried again, and the day after. Little by little, overcoming weakness and pain, I began regaining control over my own body. Gabriel observed my efforts with restrained approval, sometimes offering advice on how to move to minimize strain on my ribs. During this time, a strange trust began forming between us. He was my savior, but also my jailer, the man preventing me from contacting the world. I didn't know his story, but I sensed that behind his hermitage lay something more than a simple desire for solitude. As I recovered, I began helping with simple tasks around the cabin, chopping wood with difficulty at first, then more confidently, preparing food, fixing the roof damaged by a recent storm. Each action brought me back to life, reminding me of who I was before the crash. At night, nightmares plagued me. I saw the falling plane but couldn't control it, saw my children's faces clouded with grief, and Olivia, not as she'd become after Noah's death, but as she was before, warmth in her eyes and a gentle smile. I would wake in cold sweat, gasping with unspoken words. One morning, as we breakfasted on fish Gabriel had caught, I decided it was time to demand answers. "Who are you really?" I asked directly, "and why are you hiding here?" Gabriel looked at me for a long time, as if assessing whether I was ready to hear the truth. "Someone who screwed up," he finally answered. "Like many others, but my mistakes cost someone their life." He didn't continue, and I didn't push. It was a first step toward trust that we both had to earn. Death announcement. Meanwhile in town. As I later learned from Ethan, events unfolded as follows. St. Joseph's Church was filled to capacity. Most residents of the small town had come to say goodbye to Nathaniel Blackwood, war hero, pilot, father, whom many knew personally and others through stories. In the front row sat Olivia, dressed in a simple black dress, her face frozen in a mask of calm acceptance. Beside her, Abby, quietly crying, and Ethan, with the stone expression of someone who wouldn't allow himself to break. On Olivia's other side sat Victor Harmon, his hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support that seemed simultaneously intimate and possessive. The search operation had officially ended 5 days after the plane's disappearance. No wreckage found, no body discovered, but the chances of surviving a crash in the dense Appalachian wilderness were practically non-existent, especially after a severe storm that flooded the lowlands and washed away possible traces of the accident. The choir finished a hymn, and Victor approached the pulpit. His dark suit was impeccable, as always, his expression the perfect blend of grief and dignity. "Nathaniel Blackwood wasn't just my business partner but my best friend," he began, surveying the gathered mourners. "A man of honor and duty who never retreated in the face of danger. First in war, where he defended our country, then in the skis, where he tested machines that expanded the boundaries of the possible. Olivia stared straight ahead, unblinking. Her breathing was even, too even, as if controlled by willpower. Ethan shifted his gaze from her to Victor and back again, a barely noticeable crease between his brows. In these difficult times, I promised to care for Nate's family as he would have wanted, Victor continued, now looking directly at Olivia. With financial matters with the children with you, Olivia. Nate often told me how he worried about your future if something happened to him. I won't let him down. In the back rows of the church sat Leo Jenkins, the mechanic. His eyes were red, either from tears or alcohol, the smell of which was noticeable even at a distance. He nervously twisted the service program in his hands, tearing it along the edges. After the ceremony, people slowly dispersed, stopping to express condolences to the family. Ethan noticed Leo hurriedly heading for the exit, avoiding meeting them. Something in his behavior, jerky movements, downcast gaze, sparked a suspicion that had been smoldering in Ethan since the day news of the plane crash arrived. "Mr. Jenkins," he called to the mechanic, stepping away from his mother and sister, "could I ask you a question?" Leo stopped, clenching his fists. Slowly, as if forcing himself, he turned to Ethan. "Sure, kid." His voice was hoarse, unnaturally loud for the churchyard. "What do you want to know?" "About my father's last flight. You conducted the technical inspection of the plane. Was there anything unusual? Any problems with the aircraft?" Leo's face contorted as if in pain. "Why such questions? Think I did my job poorly? Think it's my fault?" "I'm just trying to understand what happened." Ethan was surprised by such a reaction. "Dad spoke to me about the flight before takeoff. He was concerned." "Leave me alone," Leo almost shouted, attracting attention from bystanders. "I don't know anything, nothing." Victor appeared beside them, as if by magic. His hand came down on Leo's shoulder, squeezing a bit harder than necessary for a friendly gesture. "Leo, you're upset. We're all upset." His voice was soft, but his eyes were cold. "Maybe you should go home and rest." Leo nodded, suddenly obedient as a child. "Yes, yes, you're right, I'll go." He cast a final glance at Ethan, a strange mixture of guilt and fear, and quickly left, almost ran from the churchyard. "Don't mind him, Ethan," Victor smiled gently. "Leo's taking it hard. He and your father worked together for many years." 3 years, Ethan automatically corrected. "Not that many." "Enough to form an attachment." Victor guided Ethan back toward Olivia and Abby. "Come, your mother needs you now." But Ethan noticed the quick glance exchanged between Victor and Leo before the mechanic left. A glance containing neither sorrow nor sympathy, only cold understanding. After the memorial service, Victor gathered the Blackwood family in his spacious home on the outskirts of town, officially for a private memorial dinner, in reality to discuss practical matters. "I've contacted the insurance company," he said, sitting at the head of the table with a glass of whiskey. "As soon as all formalities are completed, you'll receive the first payment." Nate was a prudent man. He took out an excellent insurance policy. "I didn't know," Olivia said quietly, looking at her untouched glass. "He never discussed such things with me." "He wanted to protect you, dear." Victor covered her hand with his. "Nate was always like that, trying to handle everything alone, carry all the burden on his shoulders." Ethan watched their interaction with growing concern. His mother's strange detachment, Victor's casual familiarity, and his surprisingly deep knowledge of their family's financial affairs. "Mr. Harmon," he began, "you mentioned the contract you offered Dad. What kind of flight was it?" Victor looked at him with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A routine charter, Ethan. Equipment transport across the Blue Ridge. Your father was the best pilot for such work." "Then why was the route changed at the last minute? Why did Dad tell me something wasn't right?" Silence fell over the table. Abby shifted her gaze from her brother to Victor. Olivia remained frozen, still staring at her glass. Your father was under pressure, Victor said carefully. After what happened with Noah, well, you know, his psychological state was unstable. My father wasn't crazy. Ethan, Olivia finally looked up. Don't speak to Victor that way. He's only trying to help. Her eyes were strangely empty, pupils dilated more than they should be in a brightly lit room. Ethan suddenly remembered his father's last message. Don't trust V. Sorry, he said, feeling not an ounce of remorse. I'm just trying to understand what happened. It was an accident, Ethan. Victor's voice was soft, almost hypnotic. Sometimes we just need to accept that and move on. But Ethan wasn't ready to accept and move on. Not when every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. Ethan's suspicions. Marcus Dawson hadn't changed since Ethan last saw him, at Noah's funeral. Still the same faded jeans, worn leather jacket, perceptive eyes of someone accustomed to noticing details. The only difference, the cane he leaned on while entering the cafe where they'd arranged to meet. The aftermath of an injury in Afghanistan, received in the very battle where Nathaniel Blackwood saved his life. Ethan, Marcus extended his hand for a firm handshake. You've grown. It's been almost 2 years, Mr. Dawson. Call me Marcus, for God's sake. Mr. Dawson is my father. They settled at a corner table where their conversation couldn't be overheard. Marcus ordered coffee for himself and a milkshake for Ethan, eliciting an involuntary smile from the latter. He remembered what Ethan loved as a child. Good thing you called, Marcus began after the waitress left. I was going to contact you myself when I heard about your father. You don't believe it was an accident, not a question, a statement. Marcus looked carefully at Ethan, as if reassessing him. Why do you think that? Because I don't believe it either. I don't trust Victor. Victor Harmon. Ethan nodded. You realize you're suspecting the man who's currently supporting your family, who organized the funeral, handles the insurance, supports your mother. I'm not accusing anyone. Yet, Ethan pulled a folder from his backpack. I just want you to look at this. He spread printouts on the table, technical data with electronic spreadsheets and graphs. What's this? Data from the onboard system of the car where Noah died, when Dad was driving. I was working on a school project about automotive diagnostics and got access to insurance company archives. I was studying accidents for statistics and found the report on ours. Marcus put on reading glasses and carefully reviewed the documents. And where did you get the report on your father's plane? From Dad's friend at the aviation company. He gave me a copy of the preliminary findings of the investigation. Marcus shifted his gaze from one document to another, his face growing increasingly grim. The braking system in the car was damaged in exactly the same way as the hydraulics in your father's plane, he finally said, removing his glasses. The same principle, not a sudden failure, but a gradual, calculated leak that leads to complete loss of control at the most inopportune moment. He leaned back, looking at Ethan with new respect. This isn't coincidence. It's the signature of a professional, someone who understands both cars and planes, someone with access to both vehicles. Leo Jenkins, said Ethan. The mechanic, possibly, but he doesn't seem like someone who plans such things, more like an executor. Then who's the planner, Victor? Marcus drummed his fingers on the table, considering the situation. What do you know about Victor Harmon's past, about how he met your parents? He and Dad were business partners, aviation business. They met when Mom was conducting psychological assessments for a military contract. Your mother evaluated Victor. Ethan thought, trying to remember. I'm not sure, I think so. She worked with the entire team. Marcus made a note in his notebook. Interesting. And when did Victor start showing special interest in your family? What was his interaction with you before Noah's death? He was always around. Uncle Victor, we called him, but after the accident, he practically became family, especially for Mom. And your father, how did he feel about this friendship? Fine, I think, at least until Noah's death, Ethan swallowed. After that, everything changed. My parents grew apart. Mom blamed Dad for the accident. And Victor? Victor supported Mom, said Dad was careless, that his military experience made him reckless, risk-taking, that he drove recklessly and that's why Noah died. Marcus closed his notebook and looked intently at Ethan. I need to gather more information about Victor Harmon, his background, connections, finances. If he's really behind these accidents, there must be a reason. I think the reason is my mother, Ethan said quietly. He looks at her the way Dad used to look when they first met. Marcus nodded, not looking surprised. Classic scenario. Eliminate the rival, comfort the widow, become a hero to the orphaned children. What will we do? First, we'll be careful. If Victor really orchestrated 2 accidents, he won't stop at anything. Second, we'll gather evidence. I'm particularly interested in the connection between Victor and the mechanic Leo. And third, we'll find out what's happening with your mother. Her behavior, from your description, is atypical even for a grieving person. Ethan felt simultaneous relief and fear. Relief that he wasn't alone in his suspicions, and fear of what they might discover. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me, thank your father. Marcus finished his coffee. He pulled me out from under fire in Afghanistan. I'll always be in his debt. He fell silent, watching cars passing outside the window. And one more thing, Ethan. I'm not convinced your father is dead. What? The chances are slim, but your father is the most resilient person I've ever known. If anyone could survive that crash, it's him. Gabriel's revelation. By the end of the second week of my conscious stay in Gabriel's cabin, I could move without assistance. Pain in my ribs still made itself known with sudden movements, but overall I felt human again, not a helpless invalid. I began exploring the surroundings, first near the cabin, then widening the circle. The forest was dense, humid, filled with sounds and smells. Sometimes I thought I heard the distant hum of an airplane or helicopter engine, but the sound always disappeared before I could determine its direction. Gabriel gave me a machete for cutting paths and instructed me not to go beyond the sound of the creek flowing nearby. Get lost, I won't find you, but local predators will, he warned with a half-smile that left me unsure whether he was joking. During one such exploratory hike, I stumbled upon a strange trail that seemed more trodden than a random passage through the wilderness. Following it, I came to a small hill where I discovered a camouflaged cave entrance. Natural curiosity, enhanced by months of inactivity and the strange circumstances of my rescue, compelled me to look inside. The cave was shallow but dry. In the far corner stood a military-grade metal container, waterproof, with a secure lock. My lock-picking skills, acquired in special forces, didn't fail me. The lock clicked after a few minutes of manipulation. Inside, I found neatly arranged folders with newspaper clippings, news printouts, photographs. Most clippings concerned business news, company mergers, new contracts, executive appointments. But my attention was drawn to a stack of materials tied with red thread. Untying it, I saw a photograph that made my blood freeze. It showed Victor Harmon, my wife Olivia, and myself at a military reception 5 years ago. Next to it lay a medical report titled Psychological Assessment, Victor Harmon with Olivia's signature. I began reading, and with each page my suspicions grew into certainty. Olivia had conducted Victor's assessment for a military contract and discovered disturbing traits: lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, hidden aggression. He was a goddamn psychopath. But due to lack of explicit evidence and probably personal sympathy for Victor, She limited herself to minimal comments in the official report. Other documents linked Victor to the mysterious death of a patient in a clinic where a certain Dr. Gabriel Reeves worked. The case was closed when Dr. Reeves disappeared, indirectly admitting guilt for medical negligence. I sat in the cave, surrounded by these revelations, when I heard a voice behind me. "Found anything interesting?" I turned sharply. Gabriel stood at the entrance, leaning on a rifle, not aiming at me but not concealing the weapon either. "Who the hell are you, and how do you know Victor Harmon?" I asked, holding the photograph from the reception. Gabriel sighed and lowered the rifle. "I suppose now I'll have to tell the whole story." We returned to the cabin. Gabriel lit a fire in the hearth and took out a bottle with amber liquid, moonshine from local fruits, as he explained. Pouring for us both, he began his story. "I was a successful surgeon in Boston, specialized in trauma, saved many lives. Among my patients was a man named James Lockhart, a businessman who had suffered a serious car accident. During his treatment, I noticed strange visits, a man who introduced himself as a business partner but behaved unusually. Too interested in medications, too often remained alone with the patient. That man was Victor Harmon." Gabriel took a sip from his cup and continued. "Lockhart began exhibiting strange symptoms, disorientation, paranoia, fear. I suspected poisoning or incorrect medication dosage. I began an investigation but didn't get to finish it. Lockhart died of cardiac arrest. The autopsy showed an unusual combination of substances in his blood, not lethal individually, but fatal in combination." "You accused Victor?" I asked. "Tried to, but the evidence was circumstantial. Then a week later I was accused of medical negligence, allegedly prescribing incorrect treatment to another patient. The evidence was fabricated but flawless. I faced not only the end of my career but prison time. I fled, but I decided not to leave everything unpunished." He took from a desk drawer a photograph, the same one from the military reception, but with a wider frame, including himself in the background. "This was Victor's first meeting with your wife in a professional capacity. She was conducting psychological assessments for a military contract. I was there as a medical consultant, and I saw how he looked at her, not with admiration or desire, with obsession. Olivia was the first person who saw through him. Her official report was restrained, but when we discussed the assessment results privately, she expressed serious concerns about his psychological profile. But she continued interacting with him. They became friends. I couldn't understand how this fit together. That's Victor's genius. He turned a threat into his advantage. You see, when someone recognizes you, you have two choices: eliminate them or make them your ally. Olivia was too valuable to simply eliminate. He began a long campaign to seduce her, ingratiating himself, becoming ever closer to your family." "But why? Why this elaborate scheme?" Gabriel looked at me with such compassion that my heart constricted. "I think initially it was just interest. She saw the real him and wasn't afraid. That's rare for someone like Victor, but over time it transformed into obsession. He wanted her, and he saw you as an obstacle." "Noah," I said quietly, "the accident wasn't accidental. Almost certainly orchestrated by Victor. It's the perfect way to create a fracture in your marriage, a tragedy where you can be directly blamed. Olivia grows distant, you're broken, and suddenly Victor becomes the comforter, the support, the family's new protector." I recalled the months before my final flight. Olivia's coldness, her accusations, the strange detachment that seemed more like a trance than grief, and Victor's constant presence beside her. "He's doing something to her, some kind of drugs maybe. She was not herself." Gabriel nodded. "That's his method. He did the same with Lockhart. Combinations of substances that alter perception, memory, emotional responses. Not lethal doses, not causing obvious symptoms of poisoning, just behavioral adjustments." And my plane. Why kill me if he'd already gained control over Olivia? Insurance, power, final elimination of a rival, and perhaps most importantly, completion of the narrative. You don't just disappear from Olivia's life. You become a tragic figure whose image he can control. The widow of a hero who died the same way as her son. There's a cruel poetic symmetry to it that would appeal to someone like Victor. We sat silently, looking at the fire. The puzzle in my head finally formed a clear, terrifying picture. I need to go back, I said finally. Save my family. If you just appear, he'll have time to cover his tracks, destroy evidence, paint you as insane, even harm your children to blackmail you. Victor is a predator, and a cornered predator is especially dangerous. What do you suggest? We need a strategy, evidence, and allies we can trust. Leo's confession. Meanwhile in town, as Ethan later told me, events developed as follows. Leo Jenkins is our weak link, said Marcus, reviewing a folder of collected information. He's a mechanic, had access to both the plane and, presumably, your father's car. And judging by your description of his behavior at the funeral, he's clearly hiding something. How do we make him talk? Asked Ethan. We don't make him, we give him an opportunity. They sat in Marcus's battered van, parked across from Jack's bar, a favorite spot for local mechanics and workers. It was almost 9 in the evening, and Leo should be appearing any minute if his habits hadn't changed. He drinks every evening after work, Marcus explained. An alcoholic with a guilty conscience, the most predictable person in the world. As if on cue, Leo appeared on the street, heading toward the bar. His gait was already slightly unsteady. Evidently, he'd started the evening earlier. I'll go after him, said Ethan, opening the van door. You're too noticeable. Careful, Marcus handed him a device the size of a lighter. Hidden camera with microphone. Try not to let him notice. Ethan nodded and headed toward the bar. Inside, it was noisy, smoky, with country music playing from an ancient jukebox. Leo had already taken a place at the counter and was ordering, judging by his gestures, something strong. Ethan took a seat beside him, pretending to have just noticed the mechanic. Mr. Jenkins, what a coincidence. Leo flinched and turned, clutching a freshly received glass of whiskey. Ethan, what are you? You're not even 21. He looked around as if expecting police to appear. I'm 19 and I came for a soda. Ethan smiled at the bartender and ordered a non-alcoholic drink. Tough day, for all of us. Leo nodded, relaxing. He downed the whiskey in one gulp and gestured for a refill. Yeah, tough day, this whole thing with your dad. You worked with him long. 3 years, good man, real professional. Leo fell silent, staring into his glass. Didn't deserve this. Deserve what? Leo looked up, suddenly wary. The accident, of course. What else? You tell me. The mechanic turned away, pretending to be interested in the television showing a baseball game. Nothing to tell. Ethan took a sip of cola, waiting a beat. Then he said quietly, almost whispering, I know what happened to the hydraulics, Mr. Jenkins, and to the brakes in my brother's car. Same signature. Leo's hand trembled, whiskey spilling onto the counter. The bartender tossed them a clean cloth. You're talking nonsense, kid. Go home. The police might not notice the similarities, but I did, and others have too. An official investigation will start soon. This was a bluff, but Leo, already drunk enough and tortured by guilt, swallowed the bait. Stay out of this, Ethan. He grabbed the young man's arm, looking around to see if anyone could hear their conversation. It's dangerous, for you, for your family. My father and brother are already dead. What could be worse? Leo released his arm and dropped his head to his chest. I'm sorry about your father, kid. I didn't know it would go so far. He said it was just for insurance. Who said? You know who. Leo took another drink. He controls your mother like he does me. Those pills he gives her disguised as antidepressants. They change the mind, you understand. Make her. He twirled his finger near his temple. How does he control you, Leo? The mechanic laughed bitterly. Debts, damn gambling debts. I owed 40,000 to a man who breaks arms for much smaller amounts. Victor helped, bought the debt, gave me time to pay, then started demanding services, sabotaging my father's plane. And the car, Leo nodded, no longer caring about secrecy. The brakes, everything was supposed to look like an accident, you understand. But your brother, that was a mistake. He wasn't supposed to be in that car, only your father was. Ethan felt the blood draining from his face. His younger brother had died because of a miscalculation in a murder plot targeting his father. He clenched his fists tightly under the counter, containing his rage. Why are you choosing to tell me this now? Leo finished his whiskey and smiled sadly. Because it doesn't matter anymore. I'm doomed either way. If not Victor, then alcohol or conscience. It's eating me alive, you understand. Every night I see your brother's face, and your father's. They look at me and know what I did. You could testify, help put Victor behind bars. No evidence, just my word against his, and he has connections, money, reputation. What if there was evidence? If we could prove he's manipulating my mother, that he orchestrated 2 murders? Leo stared intently at Ethan, sobering before his eyes. Then maybe I'd find the courage, for your brother's sake, for your father's, but such evidence doesn't exist. Maybe it does, Ethan leaned closer. If we join forces, we'll have a chance. A week later, Ethan and Marcus sat in the same car, reviewing video of Leo's full confession, recorded in a more private setting. The mechanic had told everything about the blackmail, the precise instructions for damaging the brakes and hydraulics, about the pills he sometimes delivered from Victor to Olivia. This is enough for a warrant, said Marcus, turning off the tablet. But not for conviction. We need physical evidence. The pills, documents, something that directly links Victor to the crimes. And how do we get them? We need help, and possibly a miracle. The miracle happened the next day. Return from the dead. This might work, Gabriel was saying, helping me restore a radio found in the plane wreckage. But more likely not. The equipment is damaged, power will barely last a few minutes. Should be enough to send a signal. I connected the last wire. If Marcus is still using the old military frequency for his work, if he's in town, if he hears. Too many ifs, Nate. You have a better idea. Gabriel shook his head. Over the past month, we'd become a strange kind of friends, 2 men united by a common enemy and histories of loss. I'd learned more about his past, about his brilliant career in medicine, the family he left behind, the years spent in the wilderness trying to find redemption for a mistake he never made. When this is all over, I said, tuning the frequency, you need to come back, clear your name. Maybe, he didn't look convinced. Let's take care of your family first. I turned on the transmitter and began sending the signal, the same call signs Marcus, and I had used in hot zones, a security protocol known only to the 2 of us. There was no answer for long hours. We were already preparing to give up when a crackle of static came, and through the interference broke a familiar voice. Johnny boy, is that really you, got him it? I'd never been so happy to hear Marcus's voice. Marcus, yes, it's me, alive. I knew it. You tough bastard, I knew you wouldn't give up so easily. Through the radio static, I heard another voice, younger, excited. Dad, is it really you? Ethan, son. My throat constricted. I hadn't expected to hear my son so soon, wasn't prepared for the wave of emotions that washed over me. Marcus, is that really Dad? Ethan's voice sounded simultaneously disbelieving and desperately wanting to believe. Son, remember what I told you before your first solo flight. A pause, then with a tremor in his voice. That the sky doesn't forgive mistakes, but always gives a second chance to those who know how to learn. Exactly, son. We spoke quickly, exchanging information over the crackling radio connection. I told them about the crash, about Gabriel, about the evidence against Victor. Ethan and Marcus shared their collected information, Leo's confession, Olivia's strange behavior, Victor's financial manipulations with my insurance. "We need to get you out of there," said Marcus after we'd exchanged everything we knew. "I have connections. Private helicopter, pilot who doesn't ask questions." "When?" "2 days. Need to prepare, develop a plan. If we want to catch Victor, we'll need all the evidence Gabriel has." The connection began breaking up. The battery was running out. "Ethan," I tried to speak quickly while there was still a chance. "How's Abby? How's Mom?" "Abby is holding up. She doesn't know I'm in contact with Marcus. Mom, she's not herself, Dad. Victor's constantly with her, giving her some pills. She's like in a trance." "We'll get her out, son, I promise." "The ceremony is in 3 days. Ethan's voice broke through the increasing static. "What, repeat?" "Victor announced his engagement to Mom," Ethan shouted before the connection finally broke. "Ceremony in 3 days." The radio went silent. I looked at Gabriel, feeling my blood turning to ice. "3 days," I said. "We have 3 days to stop him." At dawn on the second day, we heard the sound of an approaching helicopter. Gabriel looked nervous, for the first time since I'd known him. "Are you sure this Marcus can be trusted?" "With my life," I replied. "He's a former Special Forces operator like me. I pulled him out of an ambush in Afghanistan, took a bullet in the shoulder saving his ass." "People tend to change." "Not Marcus." I put a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. "You can trust him too. He'll help clear your name." The helicopter landed in a small clearing near the cabin. Ethan jumped out first, taller than I remembered, with the tense face of someone who had grown up too quickly. Behind him, leaning on a cane, emerged Marcus, the same as ever, except for more gray in his hair. Ethan froze for a moment, seeing me, thinner with a grown beard but alive. Then he rushed forward, embracing me with such force that my broken ribs protested with pain. I ignored it, holding my son tightly. "God, Dad," he pulled back, looking me up and down. "You're really alive." "Really alive, son, and intending to stay that way." Marcus approached, extended his hand, which I ignored, instead embracing him too. "Good to see you, you old bastard," he said, patting my back. "Likewise, you limping asshole." Gabriel observed our reunion with a slight smile. I introduced him to Marcus and Ethan, briefly explaining his story. Marcus, always quick to assess people, shook Gabriel's hand with respect, recognizing an ally. "We need to move," he said, glancing back at the helicopter. "The pilot's nervous. This area isn't the safest for flights." We quickly gathered all the evidence Gabriel had accumulated and my few possessions. Boarding the helicopter, I looked back one last time at the cabin that had been my refuge for almost 2 months. Strangely, I felt something like nostalgia. There, in isolation from the world, everything had been simple and clear. Gabriel also looked back, saying goodbye to the place that had been his home much longer. "Regrets?" I asked. "No," he answered, settling into the helicopter seat. "It's time to stop hiding." As the helicopter rose above the forest, Ethan shared the latest news. Victor announced his engagement to Mom. Ceremony in 3 days, small private ceremony for close friends and family. He's using it as cover to gain full control over finances, including your insurance. "And Abby, how is she?" "Confused. On one hand, she still blames you for Noah's death. On the other, she doesn't like Victor, though she can't explain why. He's charmed her like Mom, but not completely." "What about Leo?" "Drinking more than usual. After he made a full confession on camera, we limited contact. Too risky, if Victor suspects." I nodded, understanding. Leo was our main witness, but also our most vulnerable link. A man Victor could easily silence permanently. "What's the plan?" I asked, looking at Marcus. "First, we hide you. I have a safe place outside town. Then we'll bring everything together: Gabriel's evidence, Leo's confession, financial documentation I've dug up. When we have the complete picture, we'll go to the authorities." "What if Victor manages to marry Olivia before we gather enough evidence?" "He won't," Marcus said firmly. "We must act before the ceremony, catch him off guard." I turned to Ethan, who was watching the passing wilderness below with a thoughtful expression. "Son, are you okay?" He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a strange mixture of hope and fear. "We need to act quickly," he said, clenching his fists. "We need to save Mom and Abby before he hurts them even more." I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tense muscles beneath my fingers. My son, who had always been a support for his mother and sister, now carried a burden he shouldn't have had to bear at 19. "We'll save them, Ethan, I promise." The helicopter flew toward the town I once called home, to my family, whom someone had tried to take from me, to the man who had destroyed everything I loved. And I vowed to myself that this time I wouldn't let him win, even if it cost me my life. Chapter 3: Redemption. It's strange returning to a world that believes you're dead. Faces on the streets seem ghostly, not belonging to the reality in which you exist. I watched the town through the tinted windows of Marcus's car and felt like a specter peering into the world of the living from another dimension. Perhaps a certain part of me had indeed died in that wilderness. The former Nathaniel Blackwood, trusting despite military experience, open to the world despite all its cruelties, no longer existed. In his place emerged another man, cautious, determined, with a single thought: reclaim my family and destroy the one who tried to take them from me. Secret return. "The apartment belongs to a former informant of mine," Marcus explained, opening the door to a small two-bedroom flat on the outskirts of town. "He moved to Phoenix 3 months ago. The place is officially vacant, bills paid through a shell company." I nodded, appraisingly scanning the space. Minimal furniture, drawn curtains, the smell of an uninhabited space. Perfect for someone who doesn't want to be found. "Not a 5-star hotel, but safe," Marcus added, tossing the keys onto a worn kitchen table. Gabriel had already settled on the couch, arranging documents from his metal container. His long gray hair was now neatly trimmed, beard shortened. Marcus had insisted on minimal disguise for both of us. I'd also rid myself of the wilderness growth on my face, leaving only short stubble, and wore a dark baseball cap that concealed most of my face. Ethan sat beside Gabriel, carefully studying the photographs and documents. His young face was concentrated, with that special seriousness children acquire when forced to grow up too soon. "Here's everything we've gathered on Victor." Marcus laid out his own folder of documents on the table. "Bank transactions, copies of forged documents he used to gain control of your family's finances, Leo's confession." "And all this is useless without my testimony," Gabriel noted grimly. "And I'm a fugitive doctor accused of manslaughter, not the most reliable witness." "We have my word," I objected. "A living man who was targeted for murder twice. A man who might simply be on the run, or mentally unstable after losing his son, or obsessed with jealousy toward the new man beside his wife." Marcus spread his hands. "Victor laid the groundwork perfectly. Any version you present will sound like a paranoid's delusion." I paced the room, feeling familiar tension in my muscles, the same I experienced before difficult operations in Afghanistan. "Show me photos of Olivia and the kids." Marcus handed me his phone with several recent shots. Olivia in our backyard with a vacant stare, looking somewhere into the distance. Abby in the schoolyard, thinner, in clothes I didn't recognize, dark, baggy, concealing her figure. Ethan nodded at the last photo. This is from ceremony preparations, yesterday. In the image, Victor stood behind Olivia, his hands on her shoulders. My wife appeared a pale shadow of her former self, mechanically smiling at the camera. But what shocked me most was the expression in Victor's eyes. He wasn't looking at the lens, but at Olivia, with that particular expression collectors have when finally obtaining a rare specimen for their collection. "That damned wedding," I muttered, clenching my fists. "I can't believe he's gone this far." "Technically, it's not a wedding," Ethan clarified. "Some special soul union ceremony or something. Victor said a proper wedding would come later, when more time had passed since your death. This is for close friends and family." "Perfect cover," Marcus nodded. "After such a ceremony, he can legally act on Olivia's behalf, manage finances, make decisions regarding the children, and in a year, quietly conduct an official ceremony when no one will raise questions about propriety." "What's our plan?" asked Gabriel, carefully folding the documents. "If we go to the police now—" "They won't believe us," Marcus interrupted. "Or they will, but too slowly. While they verify all the facts, Victor will have married Olivia and gotten what he wants, and if he senses danger, he might try to take them out of the country. So we must intervene directly in the ceremony." I made the decision without even realizing it. "When?" "Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, St. Joseph's Church." "Church?" I was surprised. "Victor isn't religious." "Olivia always was," Ethan shrugged. "And Victor needs to create an impression of respectability, the appearance of normalcy." We spent the next hours developing a plan. Marcus used his connections to obtain a schematic of the church. Gabriel prepared samples of medications found in Victor's belongings, the very ones he used to control Olivia's mind. Ethan was responsible for communication with Leo, who was supposed to attend the ceremony. "What about Abby?" I asked when the main details were agreed upon. "She knows nothing." Ethan shook his head. "I was afraid to tell her. She's hard to say whose side she's on. Abby still blames you for Noah, but she doesn't trust Victor either. And if she let something slip to Mom and Mom told Victor—" "I understand." I put my hand on my son's shoulder. "You did the right thing." Late that evening, when Gabriel was already asleep and Marcus had stepped out for supplies, Ethan and I were left alone. He looked at a photograph of our family, taken 3 years ago when Noah was still alive. All of us smiling, happy, unsuspecting of the tragedy that awaited. "I should have understood sooner," Ethan said quietly, not taking his eyes off the photo. "Noticed something was wrong." "It's not your fault, son. You noticed, tried to warn me in your last message." "Because I'm an adult and have dealt with people like Victor in war." I sat beside him. "Predators exist everywhere, in wilderness, in the deserts of Afghanistan, in small American towns. They're difficult to recognize because they masterfully disguise themselves as ordinary people. How do we get Mom back?" In his voice was a helplessness uncharacteristic of my always confident son. What if her mind is damaged by these drugs? What if she's never the same?" I put my arm around his shoulders, feeling how tense he was. "Your mother is the strongest person I know. She pulled me out of dark places where I'd driven myself after the war. Believe me, she'll overcome this too." Ethan nodded, not looking entirely convinced. I didn't press. Honestly, I wasn't sure myself that Olivia could fully recover from everything Victor had done to her. But I knew one thing: tomorrow I would either reclaim my family or die trying. Confrontation of shadows. The morning of the next day dawned rainy. Fine droplets drummed against the apartment windows like nervous fingers on a table. I stood at the window, peering through a gap in the curtains at the rain-blurred street, trying to comprehend the strange reality in which I found myself. Just yesterday I was dead to the world, a hermit in the wilderness, a man without a future. Today I was to rise from the dead and face the one who had destroyed my life. "Don't like your face." Marcus approached and handed me a cup of strong coffee. Saw the same look in Afghanistan before suicide missions. Weren't all our missions like that? I accepted the cup, nodding gratefully. No, only the ones where you were in command. He tried to smile, but it came out unconvincing. Nate, we need to stick to the plan. No deviations, no improvisation. Victor is dangerous not only because of his psychopathic tendencies, but because he's smart. Damn smart. I know. No, you don't. Marcus lowered his voice, glancing at the sleeping Gabriel. What I've dug up about his past. This isn't the first time he's destroyed a family. There were other cases. Women who suddenly lost husbands in accidents. Children deprived of fathers. Always the same pattern. He appears as a friend, a support, then becomes indispensable, and then he drew his finger across his throat. Why wasn't he caught earlier? Because he never uses the same method twice, and always disappears before anyone starts asking questions. Changes his name, city, creates a new identity. So Victor Harmon is also fake. No, that's his real name. He only uses it when absolutely confident of success. Marcus sipped his coffee. And he's never been as close to his goal as he is now. We fell silent, looking out the window at the intensifying rain. I thought about Olivia, about the woman I met 15 years ago when I returned from my first tour in Afghanistan. I was broken then, full of hatred and fear. She patiently, day after day, gathered the fragments of my soul, returning me to life. Now I had to do the same for her. I need to see our house, I said suddenly. What? That's not in the plan, Marcus tensed. I'm not going to knock on the door, I just want to see. Make sure this is all real. He hesitated, clearly disapproving, but eventually nodded. Fine, but only from a distance, and you don't leave the car. Half an hour later, we parked 2 blocks from my house, a 2-story building with a white fence and an apple tree in the yard that I planted when Ethan was 5. Despite the rain, activity around the house was noticeable. People bringing in flowers, boxes, decorations for the upcoming ceremony. They're not doing this at the church, I asked, observing the bustle. Ceremony at church, reception at the house. Victor insisted, apparently wants to demonstrate his status as master as soon as possible. At that moment, the front door opened, and Olivia appeared on the threshold. Even from this distance, I could see how much she'd changed, thinner, movements mechanical like a marionette. She said something to a worker unloading boxes from a van, then disappeared back into the house. God, what has he done to her? I whispered. Gabriel examined the pills Leo delivered to her. It's a combination of psychotropic drugs, nothing that would seem suspicious individually, but together they create a state close to hypnotic trance. Increased suggestibility, suppression of will, altered perception of reality. She looks sick. She is sick, Nate, but we'll get her out. I was about to respond when I noticed a familiar figure exiting the house, Abby, my daughter, my little princess, who once threw herself into my arms the moment I crossed the threshold. Now she was dressed all in black, with a pale face and dark circles under her eyes. She stopped on the porch, looking at the rain with an expression of such absolute loneliness that my heart constricted. I need to talk to her. I reached for the door handle. No, Marcus grabbed my arm. If Abby sees you, she might get scared, scream. Victor will learn you're alive and everything will fall apart. But she's my daughter, for God's sake. And you'll see her today, at the church, according to the plan, which we so carefully developed, if you recall. I forced myself to sit back, not taking my eyes off Abby. She stood a moment longer, then pulled up her hood and walked down the path toward the street. Where is she going? I began to panic. To school, I suppose, or to a friend's. Relax, Nate, we can't do anything right now. We watched as Abby passed our car, not suspecting that her resurrected father sat a few meters away. When she disappeared around the corner, I finally exhaled. Let's get out of here, I've seen enough. Returning to the apartment, we found Gabriel at work. He was arranging on the table medications seized from Victor's cache in the wilderness and comparing them with medical references. "Found anything useful?" asked Marcus, shaking raindrops from his jacket. "Yes, and it's worse than I thought." Gabriel pointed to pills of different shapes and colors. "Some of these substances are used in experimental treatment of schizophrenia. Others, for managing aggressive patients in psychiatric clinics. In combination, they create a state where a person maintains external functionality but completely submits to the will of whoever they perceive as an authority figure." "Victor," I grimly stated. "Exactly. But there's good news. The effects are reversible. Once the drugs are eliminated from the system, Olivia will begin returning to a normal state. It will take time and possibly professional help, but there should be no permanent damage." "And Abby, has he been giving this to her too?" "I doubt it." Gabriel shook his head. "From Ethan's description, she's resisting Victor's influence on some intuitive level. If she were taking these drugs, such resistance would be impossible." This somewhat reassured me. At least my daughter hadn't been poisoned with psychotropic substances. Now I just had to convince her that I wasn't guilty of Noah's death. Ethan returned an hour later, soaked to the skin but with important news. "I met with Leo. He agrees to help. We'll be at the church and testify if needed. He's in bad shape, Dad, drinking continuously, talking to Noah as if he's sitting beside him. But when it comes to facts, he's clear and precise. He wants to atone for his guilt." "Good," I nodded. "What about the church plan?" "All set. Marcus obtained building plans, including service entrances. I'll be present officially as a family member. I can open the side door for you and Gabriel when the time comes." Revelation at the wedding. St. Joseph's Church was decorated with lilies and white ribbons, inappropriately festive for a ceremony Victor called a modest union of souls. I watched arriving guests from a van parked across the street, old family friends, Olivia's colleagues from the hospital, several of Victor's business partners. All were dressed elegantly but restrainedly, as if not fully understanding the status of the event. "No uniforms," Marcus noted, reviewing the guests through binoculars. "No police, that's good." "Or bad," Gabriel countered. "If something goes wrong, we'll have no one to turn to for help." "Nothing will go wrong," I said firmly. I watched as Ethan helped Olivia exit a black limousine. She wore not a wedding dress in the traditional sense, but an elegant cream suit, as always, impeccable taste, even in a state of drug-induced trance. Abby walked beside her in a dark blue dress, holding a bouquet of white roses. She looked dejected, as if participating in the ceremony against her will. Victor appeared last, in a dark suit, with a perfect smile and the commanding walk of a man who had achieved his goal. He placed his hand on Olivia's back, guiding her toward the church entrance with a familiarity that made me clench my fists. "Not the time," Marcus said quietly, noticing my reaction. "Soon." We waited until all guests had entered the church, then quickly crossed the street. According to plan, Ethan was to meet us at the side door 10 minutes after the ceremony began. Gabriel looked nervous. He was unbuttoning and rebuttoning the top button of his shirt, glancing around. "First time in 7 years I'll appear in public under my real name," he explained, noticing my gaze. "Strange feeling." "After all this, we'll clear your name," I promised. "Victor will pay for everything he's done, not just to my family but to you and his other victims." The door opened precisely at the agreed time. Ethan looked pale but determined. "Everything's going according to plan. The ceremony has begun." Victor gave some speech about love overcoming death. His voice trembled with disgust. "Now the priest is reading a prayer." "Leo's here?" asked Marcus. "In the last row, barely standing but conscious." We slipped into the church through the side entrance and took position in a technical corridor leading to the altar. Through a small window, I could see what was happening inside. Olivia and Victor stood before the priest. Guests filled the pews. Abby sat in the front row, listlessly staring ahead. My heart pounded so hard that it seemed its beat must be audible to everyone around. I leaned against the wall, feeling approaching nausea, a combination of nerves, rage, and fear for my family. "Steady," Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. "Breathe. You've been through worse. You survived a plane crash and 2 months in the wilderness. You'll handle this too." I nodded, focusing on my breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 to hold, 4 seconds out. The same rhythm that helped me stay calm under fire in Afghanistan. The priest's voice became clearer. He had moved to the key moment of the ceremony. "Gathered here today to witness the union of Victor and Olivia. Before they exchange vows, I must ask, if anyone knows a reason why this union cannot or should not be joined, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." I glanced at Marcus, who nodded. The moment had arrived. I pushed open the door and stepped into the main hall of the church. For a moment, absolute silence reigned. Guests froze, not understanding who this stranger was interrupting the ceremony. Then someone gasped, recognizing me, and a whisper swept through the rows like wind through a wheat field. "Nate, Nathaniel Blackwood, but he's dead." I walked down the central aisle, looking only at Olivia. Her eyes widened, mouth opening in silent surprise. Something flickered in her gaze, a glimmer of recognition, struggle against the medicinal fog. "I object to this union," my voice echoed through the church. "On the grounds that I, Olivia Blackwood's lawful husband, am alive, and on the grounds that this man," I pointed at Victor, frozen with a mask of shock on his face, "tried to kill me. Twice." Guests jumped from their seats. Some shouted, some cried, several pulled out phones, recording what was happening. Abby looked at me with an expression of absolute astonishment, her face white as chalk. "Nate," Olivia whispered, taking an uncertain step toward me. "This, impossible, you died." "No, Olivia, I survived, and I'm here to tell the truth." Victor finally emerged from his stupor. His face changed. The mask of shocked friend fell away, revealing the cold fury of a cornered predator. "This is some ridiculous joke." He turned to the guests with a forced smile. "Poor Nate obviously suffered a serious psychological trauma, and now—" "Enough lies, Victor." I took another step forward. "I know everything about how you arranged the accident that killed my son Noah, how you manipulated Olivia with medications, how you forced Leo Jenkins to sabotage my plane." At the mention of his name, Leo rose from his seat in the last row. He was swaying, his face tortured, but his voice rang firm. "It's true, everything he says is true. I sabotaged the plane on Victor's orders, and the brakes in the car where the boy died. There's no forgiveness for me." Gasps of horror swept through the hall. Olivia paled even further, her hand rising to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. "Victor," she turned to him. What is he saying?" "He's drunk, Olivia." Victor took her by the shoulders, turning her back toward me. "You know Leo's an alcoholic. And Nate is just jealous. He's always been unstable after the war." "I'm not here alone." I nodded toward the door from which Gabriel and Marcus emerged. "Dr. Gabriel Reeves, whom you framed 7 years ago, and Marcus Dawson, my combat buddy, who's gathered all the evidence of your crimes." Gabriel stepped forward, his tall figure and penetrating gaze capturing the attention of those present. "I treated Victor Harmon's victims, and I witnessed how he manipulates people, uses drugs to alter their consciousness, eliminates those who stand in his way." "This is absurd." Victor's face contorted with rage. "You're all insane. Olivia, let's get out of here." He pulled her arm, but Olivia didn't move. Her gaze was clearing, as if she were waking from a long sleep. "The pills," she whispered. "You gave me pills every day, said they were for depression." "Because they were for depression," desperation crept into Victor's voice. "You were suffering after Nate's death. I was helping you." "No," Olivia slowly shook her head, backing away from him. "I remember. Fragments. You told me Nate was a bad father, that he was guilty of Noah's death. But that's not true. I know it's not true. Victor realized he was losing control of the situation. His gaze darted to the exit, assessing chances for escape. Then he did what no one expected, pulled a pistol from the inner pocket of his jacket. He aimed the weapon at me. Guests screamed, some fell to the floor, others rushed to the exits. Abby froze in horror, unable to move. Olivia tried to grab Victor's arm, but he pushed her away with such force that she fell on the altar steps. Victor, put down the weapon. I tried to speak calmly, stepping forward, diverting his attention from the others. There are too many witnesses here. You won't escape. Then I'll take you with me, he aimed, his finger tensing on the trigger. The shot resounded unexpectedly loud in the church's acoustics. I instinctively ducked, expecting the bullet's impact, but no pain came. Instead, I saw Leo Jenkins falling before Victor, clutching his chest. The mechanic had thrown himself into the bullet's path, shielding me with his body. Leo, I ran to him, kneeling down. He looked at me with a clouded gaze, a weak smile appearing on his lips. Tell them the truth. I can't live with it anymore. He shifted his gaze to Victor. You forced me, threatened my family. He coughed. I just wanted to atone for my guilt. His eyes glazed over, body going limp. Leo Jenkins was dead, having performed his final act of redemption. Victor used the moment of confusion to dash toward the side exit, but Marcus was already waiting there, gun ready. Drop the weapon, Harmon, he commanded, or I'll shoot you, and believe me, I won't miss. Victor froze, his gaze darting between me, Marcus, and possible escape routes. In his eyes I saw what many must have seen before death, the cold, inhuman calculation of a predator. It's over, Victor, I said, rising. Put down the gun. For a moment I thought he would comply. Then Victor suddenly spun, aiming the pistol at Olivia, who was just getting up from the floor. If I can't have her, no one will, he hissed. I lunged forward, not thinking about consequences. Time seemed to slow, as happens in moments of mortal danger. I saw Victor's finger pressing the trigger, saw the horror in Olivia's eyes, heard Abby scream. Marcus's shot preceded Victor's by a fraction of a second. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, turning his body and throwing off his aim. His shot went straight into the crucifix, showering those present with pieces of plaster. I crashed into Victor with my full body, knocking him to the floor. We rolled down the aisle, fighting for control of the weapon. He was stronger than I expected, and desperation gave him additional strength. She's mine, he snarled in my face, trying to aim the pistol at my head. Always was mine. She saw the real me and didn't turn away. She saw a monster and tried to help. I twisted his wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon. Because she's a healer, always has been. The pistol flew aside. Victor struck me in the broken ribs, causing a flash of pain. Black spots swam before my eyes. He used the moment to shove me off and dash for the exit. But Gabriel met him there, with a heavy metal candlestick in his hands. One blow, and Victor collapsed unconscious. Sorry, but I've been waiting for this moment for 7 years. Gabriel lowered the improvised weapon, looking at his fallen enemy with a grimace of disgust. Marcus was already calling the police. Ethan rushed to Olivia, supporting her. Parishioners crowded at the doors, not daring to either leave or return to the altar. I rose to my feet, overcoming pain, and saw Abby. She stood alone, lost amid the chaos, with wide eyes full of tears. Dad, she whispered, taking an uncertain step toward me. Is it really you? Yes, sweetheart. I opened my arms, not daring to approach first. It's me. She threw herself at me, colliding with such force that I barely remained standing. Her body shook with sobs. I hated you, for Noah, for breaking Mom, she sobbed, clinging to me as if afraid I would disappear again. I thought you were to blame. I know, sweetheart, and I'll never stop feeling responsible for what happened to Noah. I stroked her head, as I did when she was little and afraid of thunderstorms. But I never betrayed you. Never. She pulled back, looking into my eyes. I believe you, now I believe. This moment, amid destruction and chaos, became the first step toward healing our family. Restoration of truth. The police investigation was thorough and swift. Leo's confession, recorded on video before his death, medical drugs found in Victor's home, Gabriel's testimony about previous victims, financial machinations with my insurance and property, witness testimony from dozens of people present at the ceremony. All this created an irrefutable picture of Victor Harmon's guilt. But most shocking was what investigators discovered in his home: a carefully hidden safe with journals in which he had documented his obsession with Olivia and plans for my elimination for years. He was watching you from the moment your wife conducted his psychological evaluation for the military contract, Detective Morrison explained, showing me copies of pages. At first, just observed, then began getting closer, creating the image of a family friend. The accident with your son was the first active step. It was carefully planned to cause discord between you and your wife. And other cases. Marcus mentioned there were other families. I flipped through the documents, feeling nauseated by the methodical way Victor planned the destruction of others' lives. At least 3 similar cases in different states, under different names, but in none did he go so far. Apparently, your wife was special to him. She recognized him during that psychological assessment, saw who he really was. And that made her the perfect target, the detective nodded. For someone like Harmon, nothing is more attractive than a person who sees their true nature and still doesn't completely reject them. Medical examination confirmed that Olivia had been under the influence of a combination of drugs altering perception and memory. Her full recovery required time and professional help. She was placed in a specialized clinic where she could safely undergo detoxification and begin recovering true memories. For Gabriel, these events marked the beginning of his return to society. His case was reviewed in light of new evidence, and all charges were dropped. Moreover, his medical knowledge and expertise helped save Olivia and possibly other victims of Victor whose cases were yet to be investigated. I visited Olivia daily, sitting beside her in the hospital room, sometimes in silence for hours, sometimes discussing the most ordinary things. Gradually, her eyes cleared, her true personality returning, the strong, intelligent woman I fell in love with 15 years ago. I can't separate what was real from what was suggested, she confessed one day, looking out the window at the clinic's autumn garden. After Noah's death, everything's in a fog. I remember accusing you, pushing you away, but I don't remember why, as if someone else was controlling my thoughts. Someone else was. I took her hand, feeling her slight tension at the touch. But now you're free, and so am I. We've both become different people. She looked me directly in the eyes for the first time. Maybe we should start with that. I understood what she meant. We couldn't simply return to what we had before the tragedy. Too much had changed, too deep were the wounds that remained. But we could try to get to know each other again, these new people we had become. I'm ready for that, I replied, if you are. She didn't answer but didn't withdraw her hand either. This was a small but important step. Healing wounds. Abby began family therapy sessions with me a week after the events at the church. At first, she was withdrawn, speaking in monosyllables, avoiding eye contact. But gradually, session by session, the wall between us began to crumble. I don't know how to stop blaming you, she said during our 4th meeting, looking at her hands. For Noah, I know intellectually that it wasn't your fault, that the accident was staged, but in my heart, I still see him in that car and you behind the wheel. I see it too, sweetheart, I answered quietly, every night, and I don't know how to stop blaming myself either. Perhaps we never will completely. Maybe we'll have to learn to live with this pain. How did you cope? In the wilderness after the crash, when you thought everyone believed you were dead? I considered my response. An honest answer was important. I focused on survival, on physical actions, finding food, building shelter, healing wounds. And when it got really hard, I thought about all of you, Ethan, even your mother. About how I had to return, had to protect you. Even when you thought Mom hated you. Her question was direct, without accusation, just curiosity. Even then, because I knew that wasn't her, not the real her. Something was wrong and I had to figure out what. Abby nodded, as if this explanation satisfied some inner need to understand. I want to learn to be that strong. You're already stronger than you think. I cautiously placed my hand on her shoulder, and she didn't pull away. You held on through all these months, tried to support Mom, kept studying despite everything that was happening. I want to study psychology, she suddenly said. Like Mom, to understand why people do what they do, to help those who have been through what we have. You'll be a wonderful psychologist, I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. Our sessions continued, and with each one Abby opened up more. She began telling me about school, her friends, her plans for the future. One day she brought her drawings, a series of portraits of Noah at different ages, including how he might have looked if he'd grown up. It helps me feel like he's still with us, she explained, showing the final portrait, Noah in a graduation gown with a smile so similar to her own. I couldn't hold back tears, looking at my son's face as it might have been if he'd been given the chance to grow up. Abby cried too, and for the first time in a long while, we embraced without awkwardness, without tension, just a father and daughter sharing a common grief and beginning to heal together. Ethan coped in his own way. He'd always been the most rational of us, most able to separate emotions from facts. He supported me from the first minutes of my return, and now, with the crisis past, focused on his own future. I still want to attend the Air Force Academy, he said when we met for coffee at a small cafe across from the hospital where Olivia was being treated, but for a different reason than before. What reason? I looked at my son, who had matured so much over recent months. Before, I wanted to be like you, follow in your footsteps. Now I want to find my own path, use what I've learned and experienced to help others. I'm proud of you, son. I put my hand on his shoulder. You handled everything better than any of us, kept the family together when everything was falling apart. That's thanks to you, Dad. Ethan looked me seriously in the eyes. You showed what it means to be strong, even when the world is crumbling. Gabriel Reeves received full exoneration and restoration of his medical license. He could have returned to practice at any prestigious clinic, but instead offered me a partnership in a new project, a support organization for pilots with PTSD and victims of psychological manipulation. We both know what it means to lose yourself and find yourself again, he said, packing around the small office we'd rented. Your military experience, my medical expertise, together we can help those going through what we did. I agreed, finding in this work a new calling. My experience as a pilot remained with me, but now I didn't want to return to the skis. Too many painful memories associated with flying. Instead, I found a new way to use my skills. Now I taught others to manage not aircraft but their own traumas and fears. Marcus remained a close family friend, especially supporting Ethan in his preparation for the academy. His experience as a private detective and former military proved invaluable in creating our support organization. You've transformed your trauma into strength. That's a rare gift, Gabriel told me after a particularly difficult case, when we worked with a former pilot who had lost his family in a car crash and blamed himself for their deaths. Not a gift but a necessity, I replied. I had no choice. There's always a choice, Gabriel shook his head. You could have broken, could have given up, could have allowed rage to consume you, but you chose healing, and now you're helping others make the same choice. New beginnings. A year passed since Victor Harmon was arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. A year of gradual recovery, painful but necessary. Ethan successfully entered the Air Force Academy. On the day of his departure, our whole family saw him off at the station. Myself, Olivia, who had completed her treatment, and Abby, who had enrolled in the local college's psychology department, deciding to live at home for a while longer. "Proud of you, son," I hugged Ethan before boarding. "All thanks to you, Dad," he replied. "You showed what it means to be strong, even when the world is falling apart." Olivia embraced him too, now without the stiffness that had plagued her during the first months after treatment. "Call every week and come home for holidays." "Definitely, Mom," Ethan kissed her cheek. Abby handed her brother a small package. "Open it when you get there." Later, Ethan told me it contained a portrait of our family, including Noah, all of us together, smiling, as we once were and as, perhaps, we would be again. Olivia fully completed her treatment and resumed professional activity, but in a new capacity. She began working with victims of psychological manipulation, using her own experience as a healing tool. Her case attracted attention from the medical community and helped uncover other similar crimes. We found a new balance in our relationship. Not like before, more cautious, more respectful of each other's boundaries. We lived separately, I in a small apartment near our organization's office, she in our old house with Abby. But we met regularly, talked, slowly getting to know each other again. "I don't know if we can ever go back," she said once as we walked in the park, "to what we had." "I think not," I answered honestly. "But maybe we can create something new, something based on who we are now, not who we were before." She nodded thoughtfully. "I like that idea, a new beginning." On the anniversary of Noah's death, we gathered at the cemetery as a family, for the first time without mutual accusations and unspoken bitterness. I placed on my son's grave a model airplane we'd been building together but never finished. Olivia brought his favorite flowers, Abby a new portrait, Ethan a medal he'd received at a shooting competition at the academy. "He would have wanted us to find a way forward," Olivia said quietly, looking at our son's grave, "even if that way isn't together." We exchanged a long look, the first truly sincere one, without barriers of false politeness or residual hostility that had accompanied us over the past year. In her eyes, I saw understanding and forgiveness, and possibly something else, a glimmer of the feeling that once connected us. "Some wounds never heal completely," I said, looking at our son's grave, "but we learn to live with them." Abby took one of my hands, Olivia the other. Ethan placed his hands on our shoulders, completing the circle. We stood like that for a long time, connected not only by common loss but by common healing. Walking back to the car, I glanced back at the cemetery. The sun was setting, bathing the gravestones in warm golden light. The wind rustled the leaves of trees, creating a sound reminiscent of distant whispers. Each member of our family found their path to healing, realizing that the real tragedy lies not in losing loved ones, but in losing the ability to love and trust again. We all lost Noah, but through that loss, as paradoxical as it sounds, we found each other anew. And in this, perhaps, lay the true price of redemption. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.